presence of probably the best night out of the whole year. Because you know why? You're here. Guys, I wanted to talk to you tonight and kind of give you especially since the majority of you are coming to jump, and the ones that aren't, because I want them at least to get something out of it. And I know some of y'all have reasons you can't come, and some of y'all have things going on in your lives, and it's fine. But I want to offer you tonight kind of a little taste of this weekend and a taste of what your next 3 years, 2 years, 1 year is still going to be about. Guys, we call ourselves Area 412, and Area 412 stands for 1 Timothy 4:12. I don't know how many of y'all know that, and I ask y'all and challenge you to go home tonight and look it up, and it's got so many different variations, but there's one I love the most out of all of it. And Timothy was a man who was young, and he was just placed over a church. Now I'll tell you, from my age right now, what I'm doing, I'm young. I started doing this when I was 25, 24, 25, which is young, believe it or not. Been doing it for a while. Doing it here, this is coming up my 4th year coming into doing this. But God called me to do something at a young age. He called me into ministry at a young age, and I realized how Timothy probably felt. And so Paul writes to him and tells him, he says, you know what? He says, just because you're young, just because you're young, don't feel bad. Don't think because you are young. I want to think Timothy probably loved middle schoolers out of anybody, because what he went through and the trials he faced, he wasn't like a high schooler. He wasn't like a J.C. Ware. He was just like a middle school. He was placed in a position where he felt like he was too young to be where he was, because some of us still probably feel like we're too young to be in a youth group. We still feel like we're too young to be going into middle school. Some of us feel like we're older and we need to be somewhere else. But you know, Jesus said, come to me as little children, and Paul knew this. So Paul told Timothy, he said, you know what, you may be young, but you are probably one of the most powerful people there. And so he says this line to him, that's our scripture, that's our key scripture. It's, let no one despise your youth, but be true in love, faith, purity, and spirit. In some translations say life. This weekend you'll learn more about those 4 virtues that I like the most is life, love, faith, and purity. He tells them, be true in all these areas. If you're true in all these areas and you're who you can be in all these areas, then you're doing the best job you can. Now, being true and being perfect are 2 different things. And you'll learn that this weekend. You don't have to be perfect in life. You don't have to be perfect in love. You don't have to be perfect in faith. You don't have to be perfect in purity, because we're not perfect. He says to be true. To be true means to do the best you can possibly do. The best you can possibly do. And he looks at Timothy, though, because things like being true in these areas, he looks at, that's usually what older people think of. They usually expect someone old to be more true in their life because they've had a longer life. They expect them to be more in faith because they've learned faith longer. They expect them to be pure longer because they're older. They expect older people to be true in their spirit and in their speech. And in love. They expect them to know all these things older. But Paul looks at Timothy and he writes down to Timothy, he says, Timothy, don't let anyone put you down because you're young. Because you know what? Believe it or not, guys, I'm going to let you on a little secret. Your parents have wisdom, yes. And your parents know a lot. But the younger you are, the closer you can get to God. Now, when I say young, I mean in your age and your body, you're young. You're young. What they're saying here is you need to be young in yourself. Your spirit, who you are, needs to be young. Because if you get too serious, if you take it too far, and you think you're better because you're older, you're not. Because the youngest one's better because they're more innocent. They're the ones coming to God. And I'm telling you right now, as middle school, do not let anyone say, don't let any high schooler, don't let anybody say, because you are a middle schooler, you can't preach, can't talk to people, you can't share the gospel. Don't let anyone say because you're in middle school, because you're in middle school, you don't know anything. You're in middle school. That's what they'll say because you're young. But I think you know a lot more than what you know. And Paul tells Timothy that. So that's why this whole group is based around that. And I expect you to at least go home and look it up somewhere in the Bible tonight. I don't care which version you look up. It doesn't matter because it all conveys the same thing. And I challenge you these next 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, if you've been in here to continue it. If you're not, if you're just coming in here to start it and read it and follow that. And I guarantee you'll find out that you are more mature than the others. Now I'll tell you another thing too. How many know the story of Job? I'm going to take a little side note here. How many of you know Job?
I know Job.
How many don't know Job?
I know.
Okay. If you don't, read the book of Job. Half of y'all didn't raise your hand for either of it. I don't understand that. Okay. Let me tell you quick. Job is a man who had everything, lost everything, and gained it back. God allowed, and we'll get into that at some point this year, God allowed Satan to talk to him, to kind of take over part of his life and kind of see if he would leave God, and Job obviously didn't. But there was a point in Job's life, where he was sitting there in front of three friends. Three of his friends, his closest friends. He's got bulls all over his body, like zits all over his body. Okay? The man has lost his wife, his kids to a tornado, lost everything the man's got. He can't even sit down probably. It probably feels like if you ever got a spanking, because he's got bulls everywhere. So they're probably here too, and he probably can't sit down. They're probably on his feet. He's probably the most uncomfortable he could be. And his older friends are giving him advice, saying, leave it off, Joe. It's the two older ones are leaving. Do you know who he listens to, though? The youngest one in the group. There's two other guys there who are older than the third one. They have more wisdom. They're older. They're telling Job, say, look, just do it this way, do that way. And the third one's giving advice too. And Job listens to the youngest because he knows that the youngest is closer to God. So y'all are in a unique opportunity because listen, when you were in JC Way, even the ones that are in 7th and 8th grade, when y'all were younger in that grade, y'all were like kids. You were doing y'all did 252 basics. I know a lot of y'all went through that with Miss Jenny and Mr. Nathan. And you went through things, but then as you came up into this group, you're in a unique position because you're no longer looked at as the little kids of the church. You're looked at as the youth of the church. You're looked at as someone who's a little more mature, has a little more to that. And so that's why the scripture doesn't say, don't let anyone despise you of being a little kid. It doesn't say, don't let anyone despise you about being a 1st through 5th grader or a preschooler. Even though they are more innocent. The younger you are, the more closer you are to God. But it says, don't let anyone despise you of your youth. Y'all guys now are considered youth. So if anybody tries to say that you can't, even 7th, 8th grade, 6th grade, that you can't share the gospel, that you don't know anything, that you can't help lead someone to Christ, you can't pray for somebody, you can't take them to the altar on Sunday mornings because you're young, you can't say, hey, to an older adult, would you like to go to the altar? Or to an older adult, pray for them. You may think because you're young you can't pray for, Pastor Edwards if he ever went down there, or even lay hands on him. But you know what? You have just as much power as they do because you're young. You have even more because you're closer to God. And don't let anyone try to say different. Don't. Timothy was facing a group of people. He was trying to lead a group of people who were his parents' age. He was preaching to people who were his parents' age, that they were his age group. And he was facing that. And they're looking at him, and I guarantee you there are a couple people that came up to him in the church when he was preaching saying, Timothy, you can't do it this way. You can't. You're too young. You don't know anything about it. You're too young. You're too young to understand this. And so Paul sees this and writes and says, look, don't let anyone put you down because you're maybe talking to someone older than you. You may be preaching to people your parents' age. But you know what? If you're true in every one of these areas, then you know more than they do. You're better off to speak to them than they are. So tonight, this was pretty much it. It was quick and sweet. It was to the point because this next weekend you're going to hear